is Steve Green, who's going to start taking you through the SAT course.
Hi everyone. I have a handout which I'm going to pass around.
And feel free to put it inside the folders, right? Did everybody pick up a folder from the table for me? That's your chance to lean on something if you want to take some notes. Right here.
All right.
Right here, Steve. Just left click and it'll forward.
Okay, so just a couple quick ground rules. I don't want this to be like a lecture, and I don't want this to be a super boring, onerous presentation. The whole point of what I'm going to talk about is to try to give you some sense of the broad strokes of how to get from where you are today as a student or a parent for your child to where you want to get when they're ready to go off to school. There's a lot of pieces to it. Some you have more control over than others. But in my experience, when people don't get where they want to end up, it's at least in part because they didn't plan ahead properly. They didn't give themselves enough time, or they weren't ready for when things were coming up. And that's really the main thing I'd like you to come away with, in addition to some details. So, this is basically what I'm going to talk about. We'll do a couple minutes on each. SAT or ACT, very, very common question in the test prep world. Timeline that I just suggested, and then some things you can focus on academically, really not so much classroom. You'll see in a second. This isn't working. Oh, there it is. So, anyway, welcome everyone. Welcome parents. Thank you for bringing your students with you. This is me. I run a tutoring company. It's in Upper Dublin. I work with people over the country, all over the world. I have an internet-based educational system as well as face-to-face. So that's enough about me. So let's get right into it. So here's the deal with the main, it's no big secret, the two big gating factors in terms of tests for college admissions are the SAT and ACT. When I was going to high school, the ACT was really a non-issue. I grew up in New Jersey. I don't think I heard of the ACT. It's been around actually almost the same amount of time as the SAT. They both kind of came together in the 50s. But for years, the SAT was a phenomenon in the Northeast and the West Coast. The ACT was predominant in the Midwest and the South. What really changed that landscape was in 2005. The SAT reorganized at that point, and a lot of people didn't like the way it got restructured. The biggest changes included the addition of the essay, and people now say, hey, wait a minute, I don't like this, and the idea that there was an alternative test kind of came to the forefront a little bit more. But ultimately, theoretically at least, both these tests are supposed to test core curriculum. I'm not sure I agree with that personally. That's kind of the party line of the test companies, focusing on math and reading, language, and writing. So these are considered core curriculum things. In theory, if you ask somebody who creates an SAT or an ACT, you should not have to study for these things, but I don't think anybody really believes that. This is where they overlap, at least in terms of topic. They both have math, they both have reading, they both have a language or a writing section, although they're named different things, they're very similar, and they both have an essay. Now on both these tests, the essay is optional. You do not have to do it. It's probably wise to do it at least once as a student, but it is optional. It's a kind of an additional part of the test. The extension of this is if you're prepping for one of these tests, the strategies are very similar. So the way I would teach a student to do math on the SAT is pretty much identical to how I would teach them on the ACT. So it isn't two completely independent processes. This is probably a more important slide, which is how they differ. Because the common question is which is better for me, or which is better for my son or daughter. So the ACT has a science section. It isn't really rote science. It isn't like you have to know what a mitochondria does, or what a reactant or a product are in chemistry. It's really an interpretive, analytical section, similar to reading in that respect, actually. Here's the other ones are really the key. The ACT paces much more quickly, much more, like 40% more quick. So you have to go a lot faster on the ACT. If you have any issues with time, getting through tests or test sections, that's the biggest challenge you're going to have there. They both are kind of reasoning tests, although the SAT is really more like it. And finally, and this may matter from the admissions piece, the SAT is scored by adding the two sections together. You get a math score, you get a reading score, you sum them together. ACT is a cumulative average of the four sections. So there's this concept of super scoring, which I'm not going to get into in big detail. Usually plays very well with the SAT, does not play well with the ACT. So kind of glossing over this a little bit to give you a sort of a broad stroke. These are some test dates. These are very available publicly. You just basically Google SAT test dates. But the point is they're given 7 or 8 times a year. So one of the things I kicked off with was planning. You need to register for these tests about a month ahead. I would recommend you start to prep for them at least 2 to 3 months ahead. And there's always some kind of conflict. Just as an example, I tutor a lot of kids that play football in the fall. So they typically stay away from these tests in the fall. They jam them in the winter, possibly, or the spring. One thing on here that, and the reason there's a question mark with August, is because the SAT this year announced they may be doing a test in the fall. I don't know that that's confirmed or not. There's some stipulations whether it may or may not happen. The tentative date's August 26th, so that's actually a new thing. ACT, same thing. There's a lot of information on this slide, but the point is, it's basically 6 times a year. So you have about 13 or 14 opportunities during your window as a student to take these tests. It doesn't happen very often. Quick guess. Average student takes an SAT and ACT how many times? 2 was like when I was young. It's 4.33333. Way up in the last couple of years. That could be an entire 7-hour workshop. But it's fundamentally because the entire landscape of college admissions has gotten way more competitive. So people are just testing and chasing scores and trying to get a stronger foundation for their applications that didn't happen even 5 or 10 years ago. It's very different. And when I get a lot with parents will come to me because they want me to work with their kids, and they're projecting what was working for them in 90s. That'd be a little young for me, but anyway. And it's very different. So the way most people, parents' generation, dealt with this is not how it is anymore. So the best way to decide what's a better test for me, what's a better test for my child, is do diagnostic exercises. Okay, there's a lot of ways you can do this. I'm not going to detail that now. I can answer that different time, but that's the best way to do it. There are companies out there that do these kind of all-in-one tests. I'm not a big fan of them, but they do have some value. But ultimately, if you're going to decide to go all in on one side of the test or the other, I would do it because you have good information. Here's another very important thing, I believe, is to define your target score. And this goes in with this whole theme of planning. So you have a temporal side of planning, when the tests are, when you can take them, when you can fit that into your agenda. You also have a calculated side. So what do you think people should base their target score on? Any guess? Yes, that is an excellent answer. You get an extra cookie. Excellent answer. Yeah. You want to base it on your target school. Most people will come in and they'll say, gee, I want my kid to get a 1250 SAT. And I'll say, why? Well, you know, the Jones girl down the street, she got a 1250, and my kid's just as smart as her, and blah, 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 blah. And that may all be true, but that's not going to help you if your goal is to go to a school that has a 1350 average median SAT admittance number. So you want to define your target score based on your ultimate goal of where you're trying to get. So,
that's published on the school's website?
Typically, yes. It's very easy to get that information now. There's sites that'll list them by school. You could just search what's the SAT score for the Temple, and it pretty much comes right up. The only caveat is it's trailing data. meaning it's not going to be last week. It's going to be usually one, at least, sometimes 2 or 3 years back. So by the time you get the data, it's out of date, but it may not be completely current. But anyway, it's worth the 5 or 10 minutes research. The other place you can get it, you said you're at North Penn. Do you have Naviance where you are? Yeah, so Naviance, if you're a student, awesome tool, huge amount of information on there, typically free to students. It's all on there. So.
Can I interject too? I think we have a couple of guidance counselors here also. So there's a scatter plot that is on your Naviance, and it'll show what scores from your high school got into that particular college. So you can look up NYU and see all the people that graduated from North Penn, went to NYU, what their SAT scores were. So you find out what the accepting scores were through Naviance.
Yeah. So there's like green dots and red dots and orange dots. It's very exciting. But the point is, my point is, you want to know where you're trying to get before you start. Sometimes it's realistic, sometimes it isn't, but it's important to have that in mind instead of just prepping, or working without really understanding where your outcome to be. You want your outcome to be. If you're going to take the test more than once, I would recommend investing $12 or $15. Get what they call a Q&A report. You have to pay for it when you register for the test. It's actually worth it. The test has gotten really expensive in the last few years. It went from $30-something to $40, all of a sudden to $60 or more. I'm not sure why. It's not here to talk about that. But I would order this. That has a lot of value going down the road.
Tell them what that is.
It's simply a very detailed report of your score. So as opposed to just getting, 500 reading, 550 math, you get a page that has all the questions on it, all the answers. You also usually get the actual test booklet that you took. So moving forward, you now actually have material that you can compare and you can use moving ahead to prep. ACT, everything, if I say SAT, I'll kind of fill in and ACT, because they both do it. The idea though is, again, I keep going back to this planning idea where people get their score, and you can't do this in reverse. You can't get your score and then say, oh, I'd like to see the actual test. So this is, again, okay, so I'm going to move through this kind of quickly. This is something, if somebody came to me, yes?
QA, does that serve up with the study guide itself?
In the sense that if you get the actual test, it's a little more complicated. There's actually 2 kinds of Q&A, but if you get the one that actually gives you the test, as well as the answer sheet of what you put, so you know the ones you got right or wrong, then yes, it's a good way. You can go back, look at the ones you didn't get, and work through them. So yeah. I mean, the easiest way to improve at anything is to figure out what you're not doing right and fix it. And that's hard information to get on these tests all the time, because just saying, well, I got a 580 or whatever your number is, isn't really telling you on any level of detail. So any place you can get detail about your testing ability or whatever's contributing to your score is valuable. Yes, go ahead.
Is the PSAT or the PSAT scores helpful in any of this? I'm thinking the PSAT scores we got a book as well at the end.
They're helpful in what sense?
Are they helpful in actually showing what scores, like your
Oh, okay. Well, all right, let me answer this really quickly.
Are they a diagnostic?
Yeah, let me answer it quickly because I want to I don't want to diminish your question, because I want to try to keep going. In a predictive sense, PSAT scores are pretty good. Most people will do within a pretty small range of what their scores are. So if your PSAT is a 500, 500, it's not likely you're going to get a 700, 700 when you go to take the SAT, particularly if you don't do anything differently. From a learning and improving standpoint, it's a different thing because, yeah, you get the test back, you can break it down, go through, pretty much like your question, go through and break down the things that were problematic, identify them, and then use that to improve moving forward, which is exactly what any kind of prep plan should include. It's just not always easy to get this information, at least not from the test companies. You can do it on your own, which is commonly done. Okay, these are things that you should include in any kind of prep, whether you do it yourself, whether you go to a class, whether you have private tutoring, it doesn't really matter. Strategies, pacing, basic skills. The whole goal is to practice with strategy. So when you go in to take the test, you've got a plan, you've got confidence, and you can execute it on the day of the test. The most common thing I tell test prep students is, if it works at home, if it works in the office, if it works at the library, if it works wherever you practice, it will work on test day. But only if you do it consistently. Consistency is a huge word with this. Doing it, practicing it, and learning it. So, again, it's a lot about planning. That's really what I'd like everybody to leave with. So this is, I'm going to go, some of this is on this handout, and it's a lot to it, but sophomore year is not a whole lot going on. Basically, you take the PSAT as a sophomore. So this is a fairly stark slide. Here it gets a little busier. This is your big year. Are you a junior also?
No.
You're a
Freshman.
freshman? Oh, you don't have to worry about this for a little bit. But the junior year is your big year. And it's no secret, not just test prep, but also classes, grades, a lot of things coming together junior year. This is kind of nowadays, a pretty common test regimen. It's a lot of stuff, but it's not uncommon. Again, 5, 8, 10 years ago, it wouldn't have looked like this. But the point of this is to really show you where all these opportunities are to test. So you can look ahead and kind of pick and choose. So it starts in October, which is basically the beginning of the academic year or so, and runs through June. And this is a blend of SATs, ACTs. The reason I put score review, which would kind of be where January is, because you typically stay away from testing, at least I recommend you do, during January, because the big thing in January are usually midterms. Midterms are important your junior year. So you got plenty of shots here. This is a mix of 3 or 4 of each test. This is another one where you would just go all SAT. Pretty much the same timeline, except just pulled out the ACT. Here's one that's all ACT. So I'd be happy to make these charts available to you. Like, the reason, again, I keep repeating this because this is so critical, is knowing when they are, knowing when you are available, and knowing what's going to make sense in terms of taking the test. Senior year is kind of another discussion, because the big thing that happens over the summer going into senior year, very early senior year, which Amy's expertise is getting your applications together, writing the essays, getting all the filing together for the applications, whether you're going to do it online or whatever. So most people come back to test senior year because they haven't hit their numbers yet. It isn't that they failed. Sometimes people's goals change. Every year I get people, I want to go to Penn State, they get a 1280, that'll usually get you into Penn State. Then over the summer they decide, you know what, I think I'm going to shoot for Cornell. Well, all of a sudden the 1280 isn't really going to get them through the door, so sometimes people come back and test for that. The other thing I'm just going to touch on, which to me is not a good trend, but I'll throw it out there because everybody's concerned about finances, is a lot of schools are starting to tie aid to test scores or merit. To me, that's not a good trend. I don't want to get into a big discussion about it. I've had kids who've gotten, for example, 1190 SATs, and they get admittance back to schools. Hey, congratulations, welcome to the University of XYZ. We're going to give you $3,000. And the parents say, well, that's great, but the school's 62 grand. So they call up admissions and say, well, it's a shame because if you'd gotten a 1200, we could have offered you 7500. And not every school does this, but it's a lot. And so I've got people coming back to prep to take tests to get basically 1, maybe 2 more questions right to get that extra 10 points, because it's a lot of money over 4 years. A lot of money at all, especially over 4 years. So senior year, really, you're wrapping it up. A priority ought to be get your applications together and all that, but this is when it's available. So this would be your big summer, essays, applications, a lot of different ways you can go from there. So this is a summation slide. This would be a typical protocol for a junior year. These are different places you could enter if you're thinking about prepping for it. There's not one that's bad or good. It would depend on your particular circumstances and what you want to accomplish and what else is going on in your life. The example I gave you before about the football guys, they all started in the winter, which is basically right after winter break. Reverse goes for people that are big into spring sports. So this is, again, being able to look ahead, see what's available, see when you can take it, or take the exams, and plan. So I'm gonna run through this really fast because I've taken more time than I really wanted, but these are some things I think you can do, and I know Amy can add to this, that really go beyond test taking, really go beyond grades to help you with your application process. This is one of the classic questions of academics. You're better off taking AP and honors classes versus regular classes. What's better, a B in an honors class, an A in a regular class? My opinion is you should always take more challenging classes. Of course, you want to get good grades in them as well. But most of the college admissions people I know, which is a lot, are always going to look at the class, and they like to see that you're trying to push yourself. Two, here's some other things people can do. Monco's right here. You can almost walk to it. I've got a lot of students that do dual enrollment. If you're not sure what that means, you basically take a class at Monco. You also get credit for it at your high school, or vice versa. Looks great on an application. Any kind of leadership position. Schools love people who do leadership. Presidents of clubs, captains of sports teams, and personal accomplishments. So these are, again, the dual courses. You can take some online. They're not quite as well received. Independent studies is another thing. Here's some leadership things people do. A couple of them are kind of obvious. The volunteer firefighter one I always plug because I am one and both my kids are. And I can tell you that definitely got my older kid into school.
Do you have Eagle Scout up there?
No, that's a good one though.
All right, because my son's an Eagle Scout. He got accepted to every school he applied to.
There you
He was
go.
at the top.
That actually should be up there because that's a good one. Of course, it's not something you can do halfway through your senior year. But again, these are just all ideas. You got to plan ahead. Same thing. So I'm gonna go through these more quickly. I'm almost done. So I want to thank everybody for their attention. My walkaway message is, you probably already heard it 7 times, it's all about planning. You got to know what's available, and know when you want to do it. There's a ton of minutia I didn't talk about, how you actually go through a prep program. But really it's more about the timing. And it's really about when you're going to start, when's your goal to get done, and having some sense of where your level is compared to where you start and when you want to finish. So I will take some questions later. Do you have a question now?
You have ACT or